So hello, good afternoon. I'm very pleased to welcome all of you to spend this afternoon together with us at Sorainen webinar on a private client. And initially we planned to have this event offline and separately in all four countries, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania and Belarus. But as the current situation shows, we are unfortunately unable to have these live events. And I always like to remember one quote from one 7-year-old boy who answered the question, what's life? With an answer that life is what happens if you have other plans. So it is exactly, I think, also today that we had other plans, but life is what happened that we will have this online webinar together with you. What's going to happen today is that my name is Kärt Kelder, and I'm head of a private client team at Sorainen. I will present some overall information about our team, our practices, some current trends in private client consulting in the Baltics. We have two distinguished guest speakers, Michael Rutili from Belarus and Donata Stailide from Lithuania. I will give a short introduction about them a little bit later. And yes, lean back and enjoy our presentations today. We are happy to have you. So before I go to the first slide, which is about why do we think it is important to launch private client services at Sorainen, I would maybe I should probably bring you all at the same page. What are these private client services? What we are offering? And private client services are legal services at Sorainen, which are designed around private individuals' needs. And foremost, such needs as accumulating and preserving, also distributing and donating their private wealth. And our clients are typically businessmen, founders, family businesses, also international talent, such as IT developers, artists, consultants, and people active in art. And why did we launch this private client sector group? The thing is that we have observed that in recent years the wealth has considerably increased in the Baltics, and European Investment Bank has also confirmed that Baltics' standing and weight in terms of business, technology and innovation is growing stronger than ever. So we observe that there is a certain need from private individuals to get advice, which is not only concerning their businesses, but is concerning their private wealth, their private assets and distribution of those assets. And another reason which is important to us is that when the wealth is generated in our region, and if the wealth is remaining in our region and used in our region, it will benefit approximately these 15 million people who are currently living in Baltics and Belarus. There is also another aspect that more than half of the families remain closely involved in the strategic asset allocation. And it is a certain cornerstone of wealth preservation. We see actually the same trends also in the Baltics, that most of our clients and most of the individuals having businesses in the Baltics, they still have allocation of a business interest in the Baltics, and they do need certain advice regarding preservation of this wealth and giving over to future generations. And what we aim to do is that we want to provide all those individuals with meaningful support in managing their wealth and providing their families for long term. So next slide is about the wealth generation in the region. I have to say that the meaningful statistics regarding wealth generation during COVID period now are effectively absent. Last reports from 2019, it means from before the COVID time, they forecasted approximately 25% growth for the region, which is considerable. It was much higher than actually European average growth. But first reports from 2021 now show that actually worldwide wealth increase has been led by China. EU has been lagging behind. The wealth generation in EU is not so considerable, but the wealth which is created in EU is led by Germany, and that billionaires' wealth has increased, while millionaires' wealth has decreased. I think the latter statement is rather speculative. Depends how you do the statistics, but nevertheless, it seems to be the case according to the recent reports. And why is it important is what we do, and it's also reflecting in the trends what we see in the Baltics, is that worldwide it is expected that from 2006 to 2061, approximately 58 trillion US dollars is moving from one adult generation to another. So we are just in the beginning of a trend where considerable wealth is changing hands in the world. And we see it already happening in reality also in the Baltics, that new generations are coming. So current trends, we have a slide. What I would like to tell you about in the Baltics is drafting family constitutions. We see several families drafting family constitutions. Exact amount of families who use family constitution is not known, but it is thought to be around tens of families in Estonia, tens of families in Lithuania, the less maybe so in Latvia. And if you ask what is a family constitution, then it is actually a governance document which should reflect the values, goals, principles of doing business and investing, as well as defining family members' roles. We will talk more about family constitutions a little bit later, so more in detail. Another trend what we clearly see is establishing family offices. A family office is a dedicated solution. It is usually in a form of a company, which is meant for a complex management of a family wealth. It should support the family in the day-to-day administration and management of a family's affairs and long-term strategies. There is a world trend, which is huge family offices with institution-like status. They have billions under their management, and actually, according to the latest trends, they are also preferred as investors in many business segments. In the Baltics, family offices are often just multi-family offices responsible for coordinated investments into certain projects, such as, for example, real estate projects, technology projects, startups, and they are also providing legal assistance and managing daily schedules of family members. And exact number of family offices active in our region is also not known. all the countries are not the same. We have heard that there is considerably less interest towards family offices in Latvia, while as there are several family offices in Estonia and Lithuania. Also, again, less is known about Belarus, how many family offices there could be. Third trend, what we see from family business or wealthy families is using the foundations and trusts. The interest is growing. I have to mention that in the Baltics, we don't have a regime which is recognizing trusts, and we also don't have a private foundation regime. In some cases, insurance policies are used instead of them. I will go into details a little bit later. People are also designing corporate documents and redesigning actually them to reflect the possibilities to manage the companies for family goals, for example. Another set, on the slide you see the last four aspects. These are more individual aspects, not so much of a family oriented, but really like individual. These are the questions, increasing amount of questions regarding tax residencies and individual tax declarations. These questions are typically coming from foreigners and international talent living in Estonia, and less, living in the Baltics, and less, from local nationals. We see huge increase in inheritance cases, especially in cross-border situations. Philanthropic giving and private museums is also something what is a topic, maybe less in Estonia, but certainly lots of private museums are coming to Latvia. Lithuania is also leading in art investment as such, and intellectual property related issues. Next slide, Ines, please, you can change the slides. I would like to share some stories from our everyday practice, because I think it gives you the best overview of what is actually happening in our firm and in practice, and maybe some ideas, why these questions or in which situations these questions may become relevant. So what we see in a practice is, for example, inheritance issues without a will. I would like to share one specific story. I selected this story because the things what took place in this story are not specific to this particular case, but they are actually reflecting several cases what we have had. So the story was within inheritance without a will, but it was a fairly famous person who unfortunately passed away, and he didn't leave any will behind. So what happens if you don't leave a will behind? Happens that all the inheritance proceedings will go by the law. So first of all, the place where the deceased person lived before passing away, lived permanently, will define how the inheritance proceedings will be executed and who are the heirs. And in this case, we had spouse, adult children, and one minor child. And it is easy if you consider that, you just, you inherit by the law in one country. It's a relatively easy procedure. But if it involves more than one country, as in this case, the things start to go more complicated. And in this case, family didn't know that this person had assets also in other countries when it appeared. Then, first of all, they had to understand what kind of assets this person has. He had real estate, he had bank accounts, and he had IP rights. So what we needed to do was we needed to detect where are the bank accounts, where could this real estate be located, and most of all the IP rights, which was like accruing money, ongoing IP rights, who is managing them? How can these IP rights legally be given to the heirs? And if you have like minor age kids among the heirs, it's getting fairly complicated because they all are justified to get the IP rights. And in this case, our work also involved lots of detective work, first of all, finding these assets, contacting the banks. Banks are covered with bank secrecy, so basically they have no obligation to give out the information. You can do it through the foreign court or foreign notary, and not always the foreign notaries or foreign courts are cooperative. They are not motivated because it's especially in Europe, it's a low-wage job and lots of work. So basically, we had to detect these assets. We had to make sure how they could be legally obtained and how these inheritance proceedings should be continued. And another thing, is what we do in a practice is wills when the opposite situation where we don't have will, when we do a will. And what we do draft in practice, again, drafting a will is not complicated when it involves only one country. But for example, if you have cross-border situation, you have, let's say, real estate in Spain or in any other country, you have to be careful with the fact that these assets, these real estate, can be obtained, but all these proceedings will be done under the Spanish law, not under the laws in any of the Baltic country, procedural rules. And we have a case in practice where we actually drafted quite sophisticated will. Where most of the estate was designated to be given for philanthropic purposes. And therefore, it was important that the responsibilities of the administrator of the estate would be correctly defined, and future taxation issues would be kept in mind. The case also involved different charities, so that the charities would actually execute. Would basically execute, the last will of the bequeather. And third aspect, what we are working with in our practice is insurance policies. And insurance policies is actually an alternative to a trust or private foundation. It's like a governance instrument. And under insurance policy, private individual gives its assets to insurance company. So from this moment, when the assets are backed under the insurance policy, they are not legally owned by the private individual anymore, but the insurance company will become owner of these assets. And by this, it enables effectively structure the assets separate from the owner. And agreement is made between the insurance company and the policy owner. And in this agreement, there has to be a certain risk element, such as accident or death of a policy owner. And according to this agreement, if this risk element is reaching, then the insurance company has an obligation to make, for example, donations or outpayments according to the policy holder's instructions. And assets, for example, can be distributed among the beneficiaries or part of the assets, or the asset management will continue as the policyholder has instructed previously. And why it is so popular with insurance policy? It is not so popular in the Baltics. It's relatively still rarely used, but I see that in the absence of private foundation or trust regime, it becomes more and more into play. Why it is beneficial in continental Europe is that it enables a certain tax deferral. For example, if you accrue some income, from any of your assets, usually it is taxed in your hands immediately when it accrues. If these assets are under the insurance policy, then of course they are not taxed immediately at this moment. Also, many countries use inheritance and wealth taxes, which is not really the case for the Baltics, but those countries who use this, people can also defer the wealth and inheritance taxes. In the Baltics, I see main purpose of thinking or using this insurance policy just the governance, that it enables you to govern your private wealth in a way that even if something happens to you, the wealth is not distributed immediately to all the beneficiaries or all the heirs, but you can just preserve a certain modus operandi for your wealth in a long term. Other stories, what we can share, I would divide them into the tax and structuring. Tax is certainly a private wealth issue, what glues together all the other aspects of the private wealth management. For example, again, in case of inheritance, the people often forget that tax exposure depends on where the assets are, what type of assets are inherited, and where the beneficiary is tax resident. For example, if somebody is tax resident in the future, let's say in France, and inherits something, from grandparents in the Baltics, then the tax exposure will be in France according to French laws, and vice versa, of course. Also, you have to keep in mind that local law always applies to real estate. So, for example, if the family or private individual has real estate in some other countries, let's say from Lithuanian perspective, to have a summer home in Spain is quite popular. So you have to keep in mind that tax consequences will become relevant, in Spain to the real estate. And that's why, if you purchase a real estate for a private purposes, we often see in a practice that it is relevant to think through what would you like to do with this real estate, whether you should purchase it as a private individual, whether you should use a real estate company, or whether you should take up a bank loan, what is quite often the case, how the real estate is purchased in France or in Spain, because then you don't have such exposure to the inheritance taxes, which would be otherwise true in those countries. And what we also see in practice are tax declarations in cross-border situations. And the thing is that people forget to inform the banks about the change of the tax residency. And it can cause unnecessary discussions after the banks exchange the information under common reporting standards. We see it actually quite often happening, and especially, with internationally movable individuals. For example, IT developers coming from other countries, either to permanently or temporarily live in the Baltics. it has happened that they just forgot to put their foreign bank accounts into the local tax declarations. And then, of course, the banks are giving this information to our local tax authorities, and tax authorities see that there are, accounts which have not been declared. And it gives actually, lots of explaining and in some cases lots of work. And there is also, I would like to mention the trusts and foundations, because it was about 20 years ago when foreign banks became very active in the Baltics. And there were several individuals who had foreign bank accounts, and sometimes, with these foreign bank accounts, also the trust structures were purchased, or the assets were allocated to trust structures. And now, approximately 20 years later, the time has came when those trusts start to make distributions to the beneficiaries. And there is no clear understanding in the Baltics how those distributions to the beneficiaries should be taxed. Different countries use different understandings, and even, in Latvia or in Estonia, even the tax authorities are not sure whether those payments should be treated as dividends, as interest, as other income, or something else. So what we have done in practice is that we have asked binding rulings from the tax authorities to explain how they see, but it is something what is not clear, and it's certainly something what is becoming more and more important in the future. And there are also certain tax issues, especially in cases where the family lives in different jurisdictions. For example, the husband works in UK and the family lives in the Baltics. And then also we have in the practice, lots of questions between Finland and Estonia, Cyprus and Latvia, for example, Lithuania and Spain. And always the question is that where is a vital center of interest? Is it there where the family members are located, or is it there where the businesses are located, or where the private individual is? And it is also something what, if you have this situation, you should think it through, in which countries, you should declare your income and according to which articles. And lots of work what we currently do is structuring. For example, what we have done is that to design the articles of association in a way that it would best protect the interest of family members. We are implementing the family constitution, because quite some families have a document, but it's not properly implemented. It has to implement it into the company's documents, such as shareholders agreements, articles of associations. Also, if family members have wills, nuptial agreements, they have to reflect those principles enacted in a family constitution. And lots of work is also coming in at the moment from restructuring of the company ownership in a way that it would benefit the family members the best. For example, there are several businessmen who have different projects under their one holding. Let's say so that some family member is launching a new project, be it in a real estate or be it in a social media, and is doing it over this holding company. So the question is if it is right to do so, if it is justified, or maybe it should be like a different company set up for these new projects. And last issue, what I would like to mention you from our practice is actually art and philanthropy. Both of these things lie especially close to my heart. And art, I would say, is I'm proud to say that I think Sorainen is a first law office in the Baltics who is at least thinking in these terms. To provide art-related advice to the, for example, to the collectors or private museums, or why not the state museums. And there is one example that I would like to share with you from our practice. It was quite a jolly event. The thing was that about 2 years ago, a movie Tenet was filmed in Estonia. Probably several of you have seen the movie. It's a fascinating movie, really interesting. So that was part of this movie was filmed in Estonia. And part of the shootings was taking place in Estonian National Museum of Art, Kumu. And of course, everybody was very happy. Shootings went well. And then in some moment it came out that on some of those shootings, you know, the paintings on the walls were also visible. And the question is that if you reproduce such images as paintings in a movie, you should have consent from authors, from the painters or organizations representing those painters. You can't show some paintings in some movie just like that. You have no legal right for that. And in the last moment, we had to deal with the fact that, you know, which paintings are allowed to be seen, you know, how to obtain the consents. And I think it is also a tip for all private collectors and museums that actually the agreements, if you take the paintings to the exhibition or to the loan, they should also enact or have a provisions which are covering such situations that if somebody comes to the museum and, for example, is making a movie there, you know, whether those paintings can be showed during the movie or not. So that is one real life example, you know, what we have had. And of course, you know, it is always fascinating, you know, when it comes to art and taxation. Because if you import art, if you talk about paintings, then it's fairly, it's never simple, but it's a fairly understandable process. But if you import, for example, art, light installations or audio exhibitions, you know, then it's always a question: is it an artwork, or is it just DVD players? There is one famous case from European Union level where the importation of light installations was considered not to be importation of art, but just separate light bulbs, which were subjected to much higher tax rate than the artworks would have been. And before I finish my presentation today, I would like to thank you all that you participate. Today we have nearly 600 people participating at our webinar. It is a great platform for Sorainen. It's also could be a great platform for our clients to share their message. But it's also a great responsibility. And that's why I would like to just remind that in the heart of everything what we do in our practice group is responsibility. And our goal is to unite and not to divide, and to advance and not to disadvantage, not the private individuals, not their family members, or not the society. So always to find a common language. And the next slide, Ines, is about our team members. So we have we have local teams in all our offices in Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and Belarus. We are truly international team in a way that we cooperate together, and I think private client practice is one of the practices where it is possible to make cooperation so that if somebody drafts a will in Lithuania, you can use actually this document also in Estonia, because our laws are relatively similar. And I thank you all for listening to my presentation. I've gone slightly over the time.